In the final weeks of his life, when Padre Pio could barely stand, when the stigmata wounds that had bled for 50 years were draining the last reserves of his earthly strength, he confessed something to his spiritual director that had haunted him for decades. He said that of all the visions God had granted him, of all the mystical experiences that had marked his extraordinary life, the one that disturbed him most, the one he could never forget, the one that woke him in the middle of the night, even as an old man, was what he had seen in Purgatory. Not hell, not the demons he had fought with his bare hands in his cell at night. Purgatory, because in Purgatory, Padre Pio saw millions of souls. Millions. Souls stretching in every direction like a sea of suffering without a horizon. And the overwhelming majority of them, the vast, staggering, incomprehensible majority, were there for the same sin. Not murder, not adultery, not theft, not blasphemy. They were there for a sin so quiet, so invisible, so deeply woven into the fabric of ordinary life that most of them had never confessed it, because most of them had never recognized it as a sin at all. The most common sin in Purgatory is the sin of omission, the sin of what you did not do, not what you did wrong, what you failed to do right. Let that settle into your heart for a moment, because if you are like most Catholics, your examination of conscience before confession focuses almost entirely on what you did wrong, the lie you told, the anger you expressed, the impure thought you entertained, the Mass you missed. These are sins of commission, things you actively did that violated God's law. And yes, they matter, they must be confessed, but they are only half of the picture. The other half, the half that fills Purgatory to overflowing, is the good you could have done and did not do, the prayer you could have said and did not say, the person you could have helped and walked past, the word of comfort you could have spoken and swallowed, the faith you could have taught your children and assumed they would find on their own, the forgiveness you could have offered and held behind your teeth. When I first understood this, truly understood it, not as a theological concept, but as a reality that applies to my own life, I sat in my armchair in Coventry and wept, because I realized that for decades I had been confessing half my sins. I had been showing God half my soul in the confessional and keeping the other half hidden, not out of malice, but out of ignorance. I simply did not know that the good I failed to do was as much a sin as the evil I committed. And I suspect, if you are honest with yourself right now, you did not know either. Padre Pio saw this ignorance everywhere. He saw it in the confessional, where penitent after penitent would list their sins of commission and then fall silent, believing they were finished. He saw it in the souls in Purgatory who arrived before God's judgment seat, genuinely shocked to learn that their greatest failures were not the things they had done wrong, but the things they had failed to do right. And he tried, for his entire life, to warn the living, to shake us out of the comfortable illusion that holiness is simply the absence of evil. It is not. Holiness is the presence of good, and the absence of good in a soul that had the capacity and the opportunity to do good is itself a sin that carries consequences extending far beyond the grave. Let me tell you about 3 people Padre Pio encountered in his ministry, 3 ordinary Catholics, 3 people who went to Mass, prayed, received the sacraments, and considered themselves faithful, and 3 people whose souls Padre Pio saw bound for Purgatory, not for what they had done, but for what they had failed to do. The first was a woman named Elena Ferrante. She came to Padre Pio's confessional in the summer of 1949. She was 57 years old, well-dressed, clearly from a family of means. Her hands were soft, her clothes were tailored. She wore a gold crucifix around her neck that was worth more than most families in San Giovanni Rotondo earned in a year. She knelt behind the screen and began her confession. She had been impatient with her housekeeper. She had missed her morning prayers twice. She had eaten meat on a Friday during Lent, though she quickly corrected herself by doing penance. small sins, venial sins, the sins of a woman who was genuinely trying to live a good Catholic life. Padre Pio listened, and then he asked her a question she did not expect. He asked her what she had done with her wealth. Elena was confused. She said she tithed. She gave 10% of her income to the parish, as the church recommended. She donated to the bishop's fund during the annual appeal. She purchased candles for the saints and contributed to the maintenance of the church building. She was generous, she said. She was charitable. And Padre Pio said, "No, you are not charitable. You are comfortable." He told her that he could see in the spiritual world a ledger, not a literal book, but a spiritual accounting of what she had been given and what she had done with it. On one side, the gifts, a prosperous family, a healthy body, a sharp mind, financial abundance that placed her in the top 1% of her community. On the other side, the response, 10%, the minimum, the acceptable amount, the amount that allowed her to check a box and move on without discomfort. But around her, Padre Pio said, he could see faces, the faces of specific people whose suffering she could have alleviated, but did not. The widow 3 streets away, whose children went to bed hungry while Elena's pantry overflowed. The elderly man in her parish who could not afford medicine while Elena bought new shoes she did not need. The family displaced by the war who knocked on doors in her neighborhood looking for shelter. And Elena's door, the door of the largest house on the street, remained closed. Not locked in hostility, closed in indifference. She did not refuse them. She simply did not notice them. She did not see their need because she was not looking. And not looking, when you have the means to help and the knowledge that suffering exists, is itself a sin. Padre Pio described to Elena what he saw in the spiritual world attached to her soul. He said there were shadows around her, not the dark shadows of mortal sin, those he would have seen immediately and addressed with severity. These were grey shadows, pale, almost transparent, like fog that clings to the ground on a cold morning, and each shadow had a face, the face of a person Elena could have helped, and did not. He counted them for her. 7. 7 faces. 7 specific human beings whose suffering could have been lessened by a woman who had the resources to do so, and who chose instead to maintain her comfort, her routine, her carefully managed generosity that never cost her anything real. And then Padre Pio said something that Elena would repeat to her family for the rest of her life. He said giving 10% to God and keeping 90% for yourself is not generosity. It is a negotiation, and God does not negotiate. He gives everything. He held nothing back, not even his own son. And he asks you not to match his generosity, because no human being can do that, but to give until it hurts, to give until you feel the absence of what you gave, to give until the giving changes your life, not just the life of the person who receives. Elena protested. She said she could not help everyone. She said there would always be poor people. She said she gave what was required. And Padre Pio's voice dropped to a whisper that witnesses in the line outside said they could still hear, even through the walls of the confessional. He said God did not ask you to help everyone. He asked you to help the ones he placed in your path, and you stepped over them. Hold on, because I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking that this applies only to wealthy people, that the sin of omission in charity is a problem for those with means, and that ordinary people, people who struggle to pay their own bills, are exempt. But Padre Pio's second case will destroy that illusion completely. The second person was a man named Tommaso Greco. He was a schoolteacher in a village near Benevento. He was not wealthy. He earned a modest salary. He lived in a small apartment with his wife and 3 children. He attended Mass every Sunday without fail. He prayed the rosary with his family in the evening. He volunteered at the parish festival every September. By every standard, Tommaso was a good Catholic, a faithful husband, a responsible citizen. He came to Padre Pio in 1953, not for confession, but for a blessing. His youngest daughter was ill, and he wanted Padre Pio to pray for her. But when Padre Pio saw Tommaso, his expression changed. He did not smile. He did not offer the blessing Tommaso had come for. Instead, he took Tommaso by the arm, pulled him aside from the crowd, and said something that Tommaso would later describe as the most painful sentence he had ever heard. Padre Pio said, "Your children do not know God." Tommaso was stunned. His children went to Mass every Sunday. They said their prayers at bedtime. They attended catechism classes at the parish. What did Padre Pio mean? Padre Pio meant exactly what he said. He told Tommaso that he could see into the souls of Tommaso's 3 children the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. And what he saw was structure without substance. The children had the external framework of faith, the prayers, the rituals, the attendance at Mass, but inside that framework there was emptiness. No personal relationship with God, no understanding of why they prayed, no love for the faith, just habit, just routine, just the mechanical repetition of actions their parents required them to perform. And whose fault was that? Not the children's. They were children. They learned what their parents taught them. And Tommaso, despite all his outward devotion, had never taught his children the inside of the faith. He had taught them what to do. He had never taught them why. He had taken them to Mass, but never explained what the Mass truly is. He had made them pray, but never taught them to talk to God in their own words. He had handed them the structure and withheld the soul. Not out of malice, not even out of laziness, out of assumption. He assumed the parish would teach them. He assumed the catechism classes would fill the void. He assumed that exposure to the faith was the same as transmission of the faith. Padre Pio told Tommaso that this was a sin of omission that carried consequences far beyond his own soul. Because when a parent fails to transmit the living faith to a child, that failure echoes through generations. Tommaso's children would grow up with the form of Catholicism, but not its fire. They would attend Mass out of duty, not out of love. And when duty became inconvenient, as it inevitably does, they would leave. And their children, Tommaso's grandchildren, would have nothing at all. Not even the structure, not even the habit, just emptiness where the faith should have been, stretching forward through generations like a crack in a foundation that widens with every decade. Few Catholics know this, but the Catechism addresses this directly. In paragraph 22-23, it states that parents have the first responsibility for the education of their children in the faith. Not the parish, not the school, not the catechist, the parents. And the failure to fulfill that responsibility is not a minor oversight. It is a sin against the souls of your own children. A sin that Padre Pio saw filling purgatory with fathers and mothers who gave their children everything except the one thing that mattered for eternity. Tommaso went home that day and something broke open inside him. He began talking to his children about God, not lecturing, talking, sharing his own faith, his own struggles, his own reasons for believing. He told his eldest son about the time he almost lost faith during the war and how a prayer to the Virgin Mary in a bombed-out church brought him back. He told his middle daughter about the night his mother died and how he felt a presence in the room that he could not explain but could not deny. He told his youngest, the sick child, about Padre Pio himself, about the wounds in his hands and the love in his eyes. And for the first time, his children listened, not because they were required to, but because their father was finally sharing something real, something alive, something that came from the deepest part of his own heart. Padre Pio followed Tommaso's family over the following years. Witnesses at the friary recall that whenever Tommaso visited San Giovanni Rotondo, Padre Pio would ask about the children by name. And over time, the reports changed. The eldest son, who had been going through the motions of faith like a sleepwalker, began asking questions about God. Real questions, difficult questions, the kind of questions that only come from a mind that is genuinely engaged. The middle daughter started praying on her own, not because her parents required it, but because she had begun to feel something during prayer that she wanted to explore. And the youngest, the one who had been ill, recovered, and told her father years later that during her illness she had talked to God the way her father had taught her, in her own words, as if God were sitting beside her bed and that she had never felt alone. That transformation was possible because Tommaso stopped omitting the most important thing. He stopped withholding himself from his children's spiritual lives. He stopped assuming that someone else would do it. And he started, imperfectly, awkwardly, sometimes clumsily, to share the living faith that was inside him. Not the textbook faith, not the catechism answers, the real faith. The faith that had been tested by war and loss and doubt and had survived. That is what his children needed. Not information, testimony. And that is the nature of the sin of omission. It is always about something you could have given but withheld. Not always money, not always material things. Sometimes the most devastating omission is the withholding of yourself, your time, your attention, your truth, your faith. But wait, because the third case is the one that Padre Pio himself said was the most common of all. More common than failing to help the poor. More common than failing to teach the faith. So common that he estimated it affected the majority of souls he saw passing through purgatory. The third person was not a single individual. It was a pattern that Padre Pio observed in the confessional over decades. Thousands of people, men and women, young and old, rich and poor, from every corner of Italy and eventually from around the world. And the pattern was always the same. Someone they knew was suffering. A neighbor was grieving the loss of a child. A colleague was struggling with depression. A family member was drowning in loneliness. A stranger in the parish was sitting alone in the last pew every Sunday, radiating a sadness that was visible to anyone who cared to look, and they did nothing. Not nothing dramatic, not nothing malicious. They simply continued with their own lives. They noticed the suffering, or they could have noticed it if they had paid attention, and they passed by. Like the priest in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Like the Levite who crossed to the other side of the road, they saw the man lying wounded, and they kept walking, not because they were cruel, not because they did not care, but because stopping was inconvenient, because helping would cost them time they wanted to spend on something else, because getting involved in another person's pain is messy and uncomfortable and unpredictable. And so they kept walking. Day after day, year after year, past 1,000 wounded souls lying on the road of their lives. And every time they passed by, a mark was made on their own soul. Not a stain, something more subtle, an absence, a hollowness, a space where compassion should have been and was not. This reminds me of something that happened in my own parish years ago that I am still ashamed of. There was a woman named Dorothy who sat at the back of our church every Sunday. She was in her 80s. She came alone. Her husband had died, and her children lived far away. She was visibly lonely. I could see it in her face, in the way she held her handbag with both hands, in the way she left immediately after communion without speaking to anyone. And every Sunday for 2 years, I walked past her on my way out of church. I smiled at her. Sometimes I said good morning, but I never stopped. I never sat with her. I never invited her for tea. I never asked her how she was. Not really asked. Not the kind of asking that waits for the real answer. Padre Pio told one of his spiritual directors that this pattern, this habit of passing by, was responsible for more time in purgatory than any other single sin. Not because the individual acts were grave, many of them were venial, taken one at a time, but because they accumulated. Like drops of water filling a bucket, each one insignificant on its own, but over a lifetime they created a flood. And the flood, when it was finally measured at the moment of judgment, was enormous. Because a lifetime contains hundreds of thousands of moments, and in each of those moments there was a choice: help or pass by, notice or ignore, stop or keep walking. And the soul that consistently, habitually, day after day and year after year, chose to keep walking, arrived before God carrying not one great sin, but an ocean of small refusals that together weighed more than any single act of wickedness. Dorothy died on a Tuesday in November. She died alone in her flat. They found her 3 days later. 3 days. And I remember standing at her funeral thinking I lived 10 minutes away. 10 minutes. I could have visited her every week. I could have brought her a meal. I could have sat with her and listened to her talk about her husband and her children and her life. It would have cost me an hour a week, and I did not do it. Not because I did not care, but because I did not make it a priority. I had my own life, my own family, my own problems, and Dorothy's loneliness was not urgent enough to interrupt my routine. That is the sin of omission in its most ordinary, most common, most devastating form. And that, Padre Pio said, is what fills purgatory. Not great evil, not dramatic wickedness, but a million small moments where we could have been Christ to someone, and we chose to be comfortable instead. Padre Pio described what he saw in purgatory to several of his closest spiritual children over the years, and their testimonies, collected by the Capuchin friars after his death and preserved in the archives of the friary at San Giovanni Rotondo, paint a picture that is both terrifying and deeply moving. He said that the souls in purgatory who suffer for sins of omission do not burn the way popular imagination suggests. Their purification is different. It is the purification of seeing. In purgatory, they are shown with perfect clarity every moment of their lives when they could have done good and did not, every face they passed by, every need they ignored, every prayer they could have said for someone else and chose to say for themselves instead. And they feel, with the intensity of eternity compressed into a single experience, what the other person felt when they were ignored. The widow's hunger, the lonely man's despair, the child's confusion when no one explained God. They feel it all, not as punishment but as purification, because you cannot enter heaven with gaps in your love. And every omission is a gap, a place where love should have been and was not. And those gaps must be filled before the soul can stand in the presence of perfect love. And there is a document that proves all of this. A letter written by Padre Pio to his spiritual director, Father Agostino Daniele, dated March 7th, 1912. In that letter, which is preserved in the Padre Pio archive and has been authenticated by the Capuchin order, Padre Pio writes about a vision he had of purgatory on the night of March 6th. He describes seeing an immense space, neither dark nor light, but suffused with a grey luminescence that seemed to come from the souls themselves. And he writes that the souls were arranged not randomly, but in order. The souls closest to heaven, the ones nearest to completing their purification, were those who had committed great sins but repented deeply. The souls farthest from heaven, the ones whose purification would take the longest, were those who had committed no great sins at all, but who had lived lives of spiritual negligence, lives where every day offered opportunities for good that were quietly, consistently, habitually refused. This letter has been examined by church scholars and theologians for over a century. Father Gerardo di Flumeri, the vice postulator of Padre Pio's cause for canonization, cited this letter as one of the most significant mystical testimonies in modern church history. It was presented during the beatification process as evidence of Padre Pio's authentic mystical gifts, and no objection was raised to its contents or its authenticity. This is not legend. This is not pious fiction. This is a documented, authenticated account from a canonized saint describing what he was shown about the reality of purgatory. He wrote that these souls suffered more than the others because their regret was more acute. The great sinners knew what they had done wrong. Their sin had a name, a face, a moment. They could point to it and say, "There, that is where I failed." But the souls of omission could not point to any single moment. Their failure was spread across a lifetime. It was everywhere and nowhere. It was the accumulation of 10,000 small refusals, 10,000 moments where they chose themselves over others, 10,000 days that ended with the same quiet question they never asked: "Who needed me today that I did not help?" Padre Pio wrote that this vision changed his understanding of holiness forever. He realized that the saint is not simply the person who avoids evil. The saint is the person who actively, deliberately, consistently does good, who looks for opportunities to love the way a farmer looks for rain, who treats every encounter with another human being as a potential act of mercy, who understands that every moment of every day is a choice between adding to the love in the world or subtracting from it by inaction. He said something in that letter that I carry with me everywhere. He wrote that the devil's greatest triumph is not getting a good person to do something evil. That is his obvious strategy, and most good people resist it. His greatest triumph is getting a good person to do nothing, to sit in their armchair while their neighbor weeps, to walk past the wounded man on the road, to go to Mass and come home and live as if no one in the world needs anything from them. Because a person who does nothing evil but also does nothing good is, in the spiritual economy, a zero. And God did not create any soul to be a zero. He created every soul to be a force for love in the world. And a force that never acts is a force that is wasted. And wasted grace is something that must be accounted for. Padre Pio returned to this theme throughout his entire ministry. He spoke of it in spiritual direction. He alluded to it in his rare public remarks. He addressed it in confession with a frequency that surprised even his fellow friars. Brother Modestino of Pietrelcina, one of Padre Pio's closest companions in the friary, testified during the canonization process that Padre Pio once told him that if people knew how many of them would spend time in purgatory, not for what they did, but for what they did not do, every church in the world would be filled with penitents confessing their omissions, but they do not know, and so they do not confess. And so the sea of souls in that grey luminescence continues to grow, fed not by streams of wickedness, but by the slow, steady drip of neglected goodness. Now I want to tell you something that offers the beginning of hope, because if I left you here, in the grey luminescence of purgatory, staring at a lifetime of missed opportunities, I would not be doing what Padre Pio would do. Padre Pio never revealed a wound without also showing the remedy. He never exposed a sin without also offering the path to healing. The remedy for the sin of omission begins with awareness. And you now have that. You now stand in a different place than you stood 20 minutes ago. Before hearing this, you may have lived your entire spiritual life examining only half your conscience, confessing only half your sins, presenting only half your soul to God. But from this moment forward, you cannot claim ignorance. You know. And knowing changes everything, because a sin committed in ignorance is different from a sin committed in knowledge. The first may lead to purgatory. The second, if it involves grave matter and is done with full knowledge and deliberate consent, may lead somewhere far worse. You now know what most Catholics do not know, that the good you fail to do is as real a sin as the evil you commit. That your examination of conscience before confession must include Not just what did I do wrong, but who did I fail to help? Not just what rules did I break, but what love did I withhold? And there is a prayer that Padre Pio taught specifically for this purpose, a prayer for the souls in purgatory who suffer from the sin of omission, and a prayer that simultaneously heals the same sin in the person who prays it. Because the act of praying for others is itself an act of spiritual charity. It is the opposite of omission. It is choosing right now, in this moment, to use the power God gave you, the power of prayer, for someone other than yourself. This is the prayer. Padre Pio taught it to his spiritual children and asked them to pray it every night before sleeping, as an act of reparation for the good they failed to do during the day and as an offering for the souls in purgatory who suffer from the same failure. Lord Jesus Christ, I offer you all the good I failed to do today, the kindness I withheld, the word I did not speak, the prayer I did not pray, the hand I did not extend. I ask you to fill these gaps with your own perfect love, and I beg you to apply the merits of your passion to the souls in purgatory who suffer for the same failures, for the parents who did not teach their children, for the wealthy who did not help the poor, for the neighbors who did not comfort the lonely, for all who passed by when they could have stopped. Grant them release, grant them peace, grant them the heaven they sought but reached too late, and grant me, Lord, the grace to see tomorrow what I was blind to today, to stop when I would walk past, to speak when I would stay silent, to give when I would keep, to love when it costs me something, through the intercession of Padre Pio, who saw what I cannot see and wept for what I do not weep for. Amen. This prayer takes less than 2 minutes, but if you pray it honestly, if you mean it, if you let it change the way you look at every person you encounter tomorrow, then you are doing something extraordinary. You are reversing the pattern. You are choosing action over inaction. You are choosing love over comfort. You are choosing to be the person who stops for the wounded man on the road instead of the one who crosses to the other side. You have just learned something that most Catholics will never hear in a homily, never read in a book, and never encounter in their entire spiritual life. The truth about the most common sin in purgatory, the sin that has no dramatic moment, no memorable scene, no single act of wickedness. The sin that is simply the accumulated weight of all the good you could have done and did not do. And you have been given a prayer that Padre Pio himself composed for this exact purpose. This channel is dedicated to bringing you these hidden truths from the life and teachings of Padre Pio. Truths that were shared in whispered conversations, in private letters, in the sacred silence of the confessional. And every video requires hours of research into testimonies, archives, and authenticated documents. If this truth reached your heart today, if you feel the weight of what was revealed, then the super thanks button below is your way of saying these truths must continue to reach the souls that need them. You are not supporting a channel. You are participating in Padre Pio's mission to save souls from the suffering of purgatory by warning them while there is still time, and Padre Pio promised that those who spread divine truth will be protected by divine truth. As long as there is breath in your body, it is not too late. As long as you are alive, every day is a new opportunity to do the good you failed to do yesterday. Every morning is a fresh page. Every encounter is a chance to be Christ to someone. The souls in purgatory would give anything for one more day, one more hour, one more moment to do what they failed to do in life. And you have that moment, right now, today, tomorrow morning. Next Sunday at Mass, when you see someone sitting alone in the last pew, do not waste it. Do not walk past. Do not cross to the other side of the road. Stop, look, ask, help, pray, love. Because the distance between a soul that enters heaven and a soul that enters purgatory is not measured in great sins or great virtues. It is measured in 10,000 small choices, and every single one of them is still ahead of you. Now tell me this, After hearing what Padre Pio saw in Purgatory, is there someone in your life right now who needs something from you that you have been withholding? A visit you have been postponing? A phone call you have been avoiding? A conversation you have been dreading? A kindness that would cost you nothing but time? Share it in the comments. Not the person's name, just what you intend to do, because saying it out loud, even in writing, even to strangers, makes it real. It turns intention into commitment, and commitment is the death of omission. Type the word STOP if you are ready to stop walking past the people God has placed in your path. And share this video with one person who needs to hear it, because there is someone in your life right now who is sitting alone in the last pew, waiting for someone to notice.